Hello and welcome to this latest episode of TPA Talks. We're going to be talking today to Lee Anderson. He's the MP for Ashfield, Labour man turned Tory. He's going to be talking to us about the policies that would be good for working class taxpayers. Stay tuned. Hello Lee, thank you very much for joining us on TPA Talks.
Thanks for having me, James.
Always a pleasure to see you. So we're going to talk today about blue collar voters and hard-working taxpayers. You're obviously probably one of the best examples of the new blue collar wave in the Tory party. You former Labour man, moved to the Tories, been elected in very much a blue collar seat. Lee, the PM's an old Etonian. The Chancellor's raising taxes on working people and the Business Secretary's talking about going vegan. Does the Tory party really understand blue-collar voters?
Well, we got elected in 2019, James. Thanks for putting me on the spot with that one. And with that new batch of Northern and Midland MPs came different voices, different accents, different opinions, different principles in some way, from different backgrounds, and people who'd probably not been to Eton, probably been to comprehensive schools. A lot of us have done proper jobs, like, I worked down the pit for many years. We've got factory workers, we've got school teachers, we've got a whole range of different sort of MPs now. So that gives government, it gives CCHQ, and it gives a lot of us, things to think about. And, we have to listen. People like me who have made that journey. I've gone from being a Labour Party member, a Labour councillor, working in a Labour MP's office, to being a Conservative MP in a blue collar area, and I did that within 2 years. And so I've made the same journey as many of the red wall voters, and they're looking to me and other MPs in this area and in the north to actually speak for them in government. So, and when you talk about green energy, as you just touched on, and things like that, I get the feeling in my area. I can't speak for every area, but I get the feeling in my area that's not really high on people's agenda. What they want to see is they want to see good jobs, they want to see good local hospitals, they want to see their schools getting better, and they want to see a few quid in their pocket so they can go out at the weekend and buy themselves new clothes, go for a pint, go for a meal. And you know what? Probably just once a year have a nice holiday somewhere in the sun or at Skegness, which is our local seaside resort. That's pretty much what the blue collar people in my area want. You can talk about electric buses, you can talk about wind farms, you can talk about all this sort of green industrial revolution. It doesn't mean a great deal if they can't put food on the table.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that, Lee, because it's part of the problem. When I say the problem, I just mean, the fact that everyone's really trying to define what these voters want, right? There isn't really a sort of an ideological side of it. It's people like yourself and others saying, look, I understand these people, I come from this background or whatever, yeah, and I understand what they want. It's part of the problem, you think, that no one can give a sort of clear definition of what that is. No one can really identify what would be the top three policies for blue collar voters, because it's such a broad, there's such a broad array of things that they can.
Well, exactly, James. We don't want much in these seats. We've had 30 odd years of, well, more than 30 odd years actually, of having Labour MPs and Labour councils. And, I've always said before that look at these areas which we've won for the first time. They've all got something in common. The town centres are, on the knees. Shops have gone, our pubs have gone, lots of industries gone, really deprived, poor education in some areas. And they've all got one thing in common. Like I say, they've always had a Labour MP and they've always had Labour councils. And we've come in as a fresh batch, where, with the broom to sweep it out. And, we've got to start come out with, that extra investment that these area needs. But it's not difficult, I don't think, to please our blue-collar voters. They're pretty much like me and my parents and my family. We want to see a government be tough on law and order. We want to see a government control our borders. And we want to see a government that actually is proud and promotes our culture, our heritage, and our history, and kicks back at some of this wokery that we see going off at the moment, which is complete nonsense. And I've always said since being elected, if we win the culture war, which I think we are, really, the silent majority, they do speak up. They speak up at the ballot box, the silent majority, they always do. The silent majority always win elections in this country, without saying too much. You know, if we win that culture war and we sort our borders out and we get tough on crime, which we are doing with the new police and sentencing bill, then you know what, we should be okay at the next election.
So is there sort of other maybe previous prime ministers or maybe governments in other countries that you think have really got this right? You know, have done a good job of identifying a group of voters like that. You know, maybe in other countries you've had, you know, I mean, really you've had some other leaders. I mean, Trump is one that gets mentioned, but who've sort of changed the game politically, completely rejigged the board. You know, are there any other sort of leaders that you think, yeah, they've got the right idea for how you can win these voters and keep them?
Oh, that's a good question, James. Because I think we're going. I mean, I would always go back to Trump. Actually, I mean, I don't agree with everything he's done, but he's sort of tapped in to the mentality of blue collar, of the Rust Belt, the working classes, and he's a very skillful politician. And like I say, he tapped into that narrative, if you like. You know, he told people they're going to make America great again. Nothing wrong with saying that. He told coal miners and steel workers that they were going to get their jobs back and have loads of money. Nothing wrong with that. And he told people that they're going to have more money in their pockets. Nothing wrong with that. And you know, that they are simple messages to get across to the people in America. Or whatever country you live in. And if you can get that message and get people to believe you, and I think, you know, Trump was telling the truth when he was saying these things, if you can get that message across, then people will vote for you, because at the end of the day, you know, the economy and money in your pocket trumps everything else.
But he's not the first leader to do that, right? I mean, even here, Tony Blair won huge landslides by keeping that group of voters on side. Mrs. Thatcher at the same time won landslides by doing the same. Do you think there's lessons to be learned from them, or is it a very different world we're living in?
It's a different world, I think, James, to be honest with you. I think, you know, prime ministers like Margaret Thatcher, great prime minister, you know, even say Tony Blair before the Iraq War, a good prime minister. I think Boris is going to be a good prime minister. I think the COVID has stopped him in his tracks a little bit. I think these people are of their time. Every, you know, 20, 30 or 40 years, a prime minister comes along that's going to be there for 2 or 3 terms. And they turn out, you know, to be great prime ministers. They always seem to tail off at the end, but they come at the time when they are needed. For example, Margaret Thatcher was needed at the end of the 70s. You know, the country, I remember the 3-day weeks, my mum and dad putting candles to light our living room up when the power cuts were on, when the miners were on strike. I remember all this stuff. I remember the unions dictating government policy, dictating wages, you know, inflation through the roof. And we needed something. We needed that change in 1979. We got that change with Mrs. Thatcher. She sorted that out. She put us back on the road to recovery, if you like. Now, we suffered for that in my area, in the Midlands, in the North, in the mining, and we had to bear the brunt of that. Our pits closed, our steelworks closed, everything was being privatised and sold off, you know, everything. All the utilities, all the old nationalised industries were being sold off and privatised, and that affected us. And it's taken us a long time to actually get over that. But it had to be done. You cannot have a situation where left-wing unions are dictating or running the country. That's not democracy. That's mob-handed. That's bullying. You know, thank goodness she stood up to them. And I speak as a man who was a coal miner. I speak as a man whose family was on strike. My dad was on strike, and all my uncles were in the pits. They was all on strike, and they hated the Thatcher government at the time. But you know, history teaches us a lot. You know, looking back in the history books, you know, we couldn't carry on like that. We couldn't carry on. You know, I love the coal mining industry, but you know, we never made a profit in 40 odd years being British Coal or the National Coal Board. Our wages were subsidised by government, and that cannot continue. You know, we're paying a massive debt off after the war. We're still paying that off for 40 or 50 years, and we've got all these big nationalised industries that, you know, a lot of them are being subsidised, and that's not fair on the taxpayer. You know, taxpayers want to see value for money, not subsidising my wages and my pension contributions.
Yes, and you mentioned the taxpayer. I mean, you know, you when you think about sort of lessons that can be learned, you know, from some of the names we talked about, it seems to us at the TPA that there is something they've got in common, which is tax and keeping tax down. Yeah. You know, obviously that was a massive plank for Thatcher at the beginning of Blair's term. He didn't even want to touch the Tory plans for lower tax because he knew it would be an electoral disaster if he did. And Trump, of course, passed a landmark tax bill. Do you think that lower taxes are a way of winning and keeping these blue collar voters?
Yes, I mean, it's an attractive proposition, James. Lower taxes. People, you know, I can remember going to work, looking at my pay packet and thinking, where's all that gone? You know, so many years ago. And gradually, as the tax comes down, I think people take more notice, you know, when there's a budget and there's an announcement on income tax, like, you know, the lower threshold's gone up from about £6,000 to 12,000. People notice that. They notice that in the pay packets. You know, I noticed when I was working for a Labour MP, when I was a Labour councillor, and some of the budget announcements, I thought, you know, my goodness, I'm better off. And, you know, I cannot argue with the Conservative government. I'm actually quids in with these tax. I can go and treat myself, you know, with that few hundred, 500 quid or whatever it is a year, I can go and buy something. And people like that, because you have to remember, James, that, and I'm sure obviously you know this, that, you know, that cash is slushing around in society anyway. You know, in it's, you know, it's always there. It's not magically appeared from anywhere. There's cash. You know, and if government can control and give you a little bit more back in your pocket, you're still going to go out and spend that, or invest it, or go to the pub, or go to a restaurant, or buy something nice with it. And eventually, you know, the Treasury gets it all back anyway through taxation, you know, through excise duty or for whatever duties. But they get it back. It just goes round in a circle. But if we can make us better off and have better things and have a better quality of life and have nicer things, and, you know, and make sure our family has a good life, then so be it. It's just that we've got to be smarter with the taxation system and make sure that, you know, people aren't taxed to the hilt, make sure our small shops, our businesses aren't crippled with business rates. You know, I'd like to see council tax made fairer. We can go back to Mrs. Thatcher's years. Actually, I don't like saying this, but I think the poll tax was fairer than the council tax. And I never thought I'd say that. You know, the poll tax was much, much fairer. I see little old ladies in Ashfield rattling about in an old 5-bedroomed house, which probably lived in 60 or 70 years. The kids have left home, a husband 3 or 4 times more than somebody down the street in a terrace who's got, you know, 5 or 6 people living in there. That's not fair. That is very unfair. And like I say,
council taxes are a pretty low bar in terms of fairness. You're hard pressed to find a tax which is more unfair, right? I mean, this is something that sort of has come across with the work that the Taxpayers Alliance has done. You know, we go around the country campaigning and talking about the council tax, a topic which, by the way, is often neglected in Westminster, right?
Yep.
You know, Westminster's much more interested in the high and mighty, but council tax is a bill that, as a gentleman said to me in Derbyshire, you face every month relentlessly. And as you said, it's not based on your income. It's not based on how much you earn. It's one of the taxes that some of the polling that we've done shows people feel is the most unfair tax that they face. You know, maybe that's something that Westminster should be doing more to address.
It is. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's something that, you know, obviously, you know, that MPs meet and talk and chat, and we're part of different groups. And this is something that we are chatting about. It's something that we, you know, we do raise this behind closed doors. It's a deeply unfair tax, James. Council taxes. It's I just don't see the point of it, really. When, like I say, you can have a house with 5 or 6 adults living in, paying less than one house with an old age pensioner. It doesn't seem fair. It's still one dustbin. It's still the same street lights being switched on. It's still the same services. It's still the same park being swept. It's still all the local services which you see. But it costs one person a hell of a lot more money to access them same services as 5 people in one house. It's bonkers. You know, bring back the poll tax. That would get. They caused riots at the time, but actually it was much fairer and cheaper.
And the flip side to it, of course, is that, you know, you say it's one dustbin and one set of lights and whatever. I agree with you, but so many councils now, they spend money and waste money on all kinds of nonsense. And I think a lot of people end up feeling that they're paying council tax on things that they feel the council shouldn't be spending money on. You know, something that when we look at, you find councils that have pursued sort of pet projects. They're upgrading their headquarters. They're giving their council officers huge increases, you know, big bonuses or increases in salary. And a lot of people who pay council tax just feel that's not something they should be paying for.
I totally agree. And also look at the political makeup of councillors as well, James. How much we pay councillors, you know, in different areas. There's a big disparity there. Like you say, chief execs, council leaders, We've even got some of these small district councils got their own mayor earning 50 or 60 grand a year. It's money for the, it's jobs for the boys. It's money for old rope. I would, my personal opinion is bring unitary in as quickly as possible. That's what I'd like to see. I think there's lots of money. There's millions of pounds of cash to be saved in local authorities. There's too much management in there. There's too many councillors, bone idle councillors, in places like in Ashfield, where I represent, who quite frankly are just in it for the money. I mean, I never knew until I became a councillor how much these councillors actually earn. So, I mean, some of them, the district councillors and county councillors, they're getting 50 grand a year. And these people are unemployable outside the industry. They wouldn't get a job. Well, they wouldn't get a job. And they see this, I think, in my word, these streets are paved with gold. There's no wonder they're out leafleting and knocking on doors and want to get re-elected every 4 years, because this is the best job in the world for some people. So, and that's something that people, the general public who just put their cross in a box every 4 or 5 years, they don't see that side. But, being a councillor, as I've been, I've got a little bit more passionate about local government and taxation and council tax and stuff like that. And I see firsthand the big salaries. I see the waste. I see, the way we don't run it like a business. We've got council officers and we've got councillors, the portfolio holders. Quite frankly, if you gave them a corner shop to run, it would be closed within a week, because they've got no business sense, no business acumen. They wouldn't know how to run a business. They wouldn't know how to regenerate a high street or anything like that. Yet these people are actually in charge of regeneration in my area. It's absolutely madness. Why would you have somebody that couldn't run a corner shop or run their own business, running the business for the whole area? That needs to be sorted out. It's about time we've got some ex-businessmen in, and I wouldn't mind paying them a decent salary and say, you know what, mate, crack on with it, get this town centre sorted, and I'll give you a bonus at the end of the year as well. People would be happy with that.
Because that's one thing that you do see blue-collar voters do reward, is when they think there's competence in government, right? I mean, it comes back to what you were saying earlier about, people don't ask for much. They just want the bins collected. They just want the lights turned on, etc. One of the other things they want is they just want things to run well. They just want things to the old adage, they just want things to run on time. I wonder whether, in some of the areas we've talked about, in some of the, the red wall, blue wall areas, those places maybe in the next couple of years be getting Conservative councils for the first time, assuming that sort of trend continues. Do you think that means there's a big responsibility for Tories in local government there to show that those competence and those principles you're talking about?
Massively, James. I mean, it's the basics. I mean, you talked about vanity projects early on, and I think, the opposite Labour have been pretty good at that, and the Lib Dems. But, but people want to see their hard-earned cash, and it is a lot. There's council tax, especially in Ashfield, where I live. It's a lot of money. They want to see their hard-earned cash. They want to see it put to good use. Now, like you say, we're going to get some Conservative-controlled councils, I think, for the first time after May the 6th. And it's our job to deliver. It's all well and good getting money, getting investment for future high streets, for towns funding, and the levelling up fund and stuff like this. But it's the basics. It's keeping our streets clean. It's keeping our lights switched on. It's keeping the grass cut at the local cemetery. It's keeping the grass cut at the local parks and making sure our children's parks are maintained in good order. It's that sort of stuff that people see that winds them up. When they see fly tipping, they see littering, they see dog fouling, they see grass 10 foot high in the cemetery. It's that sort of stuff that winds people up. Meanwhile, they're spending hundreds of thousands of pounds on pet projects, building a statue, a steel statue, like this, or a massive sundial in my market square that nobody's got a clue why they're doing it. They don't know how much it's cost. They paid some designer 100 grand to do it. Absolute nonsense. They just want their bins emptied.
Well, hang about. Don't you think the same goes at a national level, though? You've got blue-collar voters who've put their trust in a Tory government for the first time. And for some of them, they might feel that they've got the government, wasting money on COVID contracts. Really, there's waste there. They might feel that government's wasting money on, media studios at Downing Street or whatever it is. Do you think that surely applies at a national level, where those voters are going to want a Tory government that's spent money well at the end of its time rather than wasting it?
Yeah, I think there's an argument for that, waste. But, during a COVID pandemic, I've never lived through this before, James, neither of you. I don't know what I would have done if I'd had the purse strings. I think the concentration had to be on doing what you thought was right to save lives, to prolong lives, to make sure NHS had got the resources you need. Yeah, and maybe we have wasted money. I get a little bit disappointed at the Labour Party for keep trying to make a debate about this. Let's have that debate when this is done. Let's start pointing the finger when people are back at work, when our businesses are back open, when our pubs and clubs and restaurants are back open. And yeah, I mean, I'm quite happy to have that debate in Parliament, have that argument out there, get it out there in the open, look at every single thing, look at every penny that's been spent. And I'm sure we've wasted money. We probably have wasted a lot of money. But, what do? It's been a mammoth effort. And like I said early on in the interview, when I started work in the 80s, up until, 2008, 2009, my income tax was still being paid to pay off the Second World War. We was told that. And, I know that, I ain't got no grandkids yet, but if I do, if I'm blessed with grandchildren, they're going to be paying this debt off what we've created now. And I'm sure they won't mind in 50, 60 years' time. They think I did it for my granddad, did it for my country. But yeah, it is. It may be a little bit unfair to pick on the waste during this past year. But it's a fair point. People want to see prudent spending, want to see sensible spending. But I'm not sure how we would have done it, during the pandemic when we've literally had to throw money just like confetti.
And that point you make about sort of paying it off for generations, of course, it is going to be a massive feature, if not the main topic of debate going forward, is how on earth do governments of any stripe, to be fair, how on earth do governments in the future of any political stripe get a handle on the massive debts that have now been built up? As you say, might be completely understandable and fair enough and all of that, but it's still going to be a massive fiscal challenge going forward. One of the things that sort of leads to is you get this debate about does the government in the long term need to be raising taxes to try and pay off that debt, to try and cover some of the money it's borrowed? What do you make of that? Do you think future Tory governments, blue collar Tory governments, should be raising taxes?
No, absolutely not, James. I don't think we should be raising taxes at all. I think we should be scrapping some taxes. Like I've spoke about the council tax, poll tax, or whatever you want to call it. I'd love to see small business rates scrapped forever. Anything under the 50k threshold. How does taxing a small business, a corner shop, or a market trader who wants to go and open that shop? How does business rates encourage him to open a business? It doesn't. It stops him. That 3 or 4 or 5 grand a year or 12 grand a year, whatever it is they're paying in business rates, that will be much better reinvesting in that small corner shop. Recruiting an extra member of staff, and developing your business. But the big one for me is stamp duty on housing. Now we've sort of been forced into scrapping stamp duty, or having a stamp duty holiday, if you like. We've been, we've had our hand, and that has actually shown us that it does boost the house market. We've had a torrid year, people losing their jobs, businesses, but the one thing that stood up is the housing market. Now, where I live, and houses aren't that expensive where I live, but every time a house goes up for sale, within 2 days it's sold. And people, they're racing against time to take advantage of that stamp duty holiday. I know they are. I know the solicitors are snowed under with work, and the housing market is a good barometer, really, of how the country's doing. People are buying, they're selling. There's lots of money changing hands, and obviously with house sales, that pumps into the local economy as well. People's going to want plumbers, they're going to want decorators, they're going to want white goods. They're going to be changing the utility firm. There's all sorts of things that's connected to the housing market. So it's that would the stamp again. Why is that fair? How is stamp duty fair when you want to buy a house or upgrade, and you've done well in your life, you've worked hard, you save your money, you want to buy, you're aspirational, you want to use typical blue collar worker, you want that bigger house, you was brought up in a terraced house like I was a mum and dad, you want a semi, then you want a detached, and then you want a house with a little bit of land. How does 20, 30 grand stamp duty help you do that? It doesn't. We're not rich people, we're just people that work hard, save our money, pay our taxes, so yeah, definitely stamp duty. That's a massive. If I could wave a magic wand, I'd say to Rishi, get rid of it, because, like I say, the money's there in the economy. It's still sloshing around.
And it's when you think about that group of voters, Lee, maybe scrapping stamp duty could be the Thatcher Council House sale moment. It could be the thing which lets a lot of people access a home that they could never before have even dreamed of. Because, as you say, stamp duty bills are cruel in the sense that they they hit you at a time when you can least afford it, and by God, do they hit you? Those bills can come in at 10 grand for someone just trying to buy an ordinary family home.
Yeah.
So for you then, you think that there's a path through tax cuts of doing some big things to sort of win and keep those blue collar voters?
Yeah, I think there is, James, and housing, owning your own property is a massive thing for people. And I'll tell you a little story. 3 or 4 years back, I think it was the 2017 general election, I was campaigning for the Labour Party with the Labour MP in the marketplace just down the road here. And I stopped an old chap. He was sat down, and it turned out he'd been a miner for 40 years. And I asked him which way he was going to vote. He said Conservative. And I said to him, do you mind me asking, you're an ex-miner, you've been through strike and everything, why are you voting Conservative? He says, because in the early 80s, Maggie Thatcher let me buy my council house. And when I die, my children, my 2 children, will get half each. And without that, I would have never owned my own property, and I would have never had anything to leave to my children. And I walked away from him, and I thought to myself, I can't really argue with that. I can't come back at him. He's actually been gifted something by a Conservative government, by Maggie, and that's made him a property owner. It's made him have a bit of wealth, and it's made it so on his deathbed he can pass that on to his children, knowing he's left them 50 or 60 grand each, or probably more, and he's a happy man, because then his life's not been worthless. It's not been pointless. He's left this world with a lot more than he came in with. And if you can do that, if a government can give you that opportunity to leave this world and leave your family, reasonably well off, a few quid in the bank, then people will vote for you. They'll vote for that policy because that's very attractive.
Yeah. There is one tax, of course, that you and your mate down the road will pay exactly the same amount, which is the BBC licence fee. I wondered your thoughts on that, Lee. I mean, look, the BBC is a really divisive area. You get a lot of people who feel strongly on both sides. But it seemed to me, as you were talking there, one of the things that's really coming across with the BBC debate is that a lot of blue collar voters and the MPs that represent them are bringing new views on the BBC. They're coming into Parliament and saying, you guys don't understand how unpopular the BBC is. Is that your view? Is that fair?
It is. I mean, I think we need a trip down memory lane on this one, James, because growing up in the 70s and 80s, for me, the BBC was always like anti-Beeb. It was a place of comfort, a place of safety, a place of education. It was something that you trusted. It was impartial. The reporters were impartial. The newsreaders were impartial. You would never, for the life of you, think which way a news reporter would vote or what his political leanings were, etc. I was brought up on Grange Hill, Blue Peter, and David Attenborough. And that's very comforting, as a child growing up in the 70s and 80s. And it's part of your family. It's part of the way of life. But I've noticed in the past 10, 15 years, it's not like that anymore. It's become the official opposition to the Conservative Party. The Labour Party, I'll talk politics for a minute, are an ineffective opposition to government. And some of these, people that work in media, work in the BBC, see that. So they're using, every means possible to have a go back at government. We've seen it with Brexit. We've seen it with the last 3 general elections. And we're seeing it with COVID as well, where they've been totally unfair. And actually, the BBC, anti-Beeb, have become anti-government. That's the new anti for the BBC. And it's the only product I can think of, off the top of my head, that you are forced to pay for. Every other product in this walk of life, even utilities, you have a choice where you buy the product from, and you have a choice whether or not you use it. But with a TV license, and by the way, I've ripped mine up, and that's gone in the bin. And if they come knocking on my door, they'll get told to clear off because I'm not watching the rubbish. It's a load of piffle. But that aside, it's a forced tax. It's a forced product. And people are forced to buy it when really it should be a choice. It should be a subscription service. And while we're doling out salaries at £2 million to radio presenters and £1.5 million to football, ex-footballers, multi-millionaire footballers, it doesn't sit right. When we've got some old biddy over 75 being told now that you've got to pay for your TV license, it's unacceptable. And you know what? The quality of it isn't that good. They do make some good dramas still, and they've still got David Attenborough, who I love. I think he's brilliant. But, there's far too much political people's political agendas being peddled out through news channels and through even some of the dramas, though, James, which I've told about, so don't watch it anymore. I've got that underlying, that messaging in about just having a pop at government, having a pop at Boris, and having a pop at the right politicians in society. So I think they've come too far. I actually written to the Director General of the BBC. He said that race equality was mission critical a few months back. So I wrote to him and said, I agree with you. Please step down and give your job to somebody from a more diverse background. But funnily enough, he's not.
Funny that.
Funny that.
On that point about the BBC, one of the ideas, because we run our Axe the Tax campaign, and we've long called for the licence fee to be scrapped for all the reasons you mentioned, not least the fact that for a family, a hard-working family on a tight budget, they can get alternative services much cheaper, and those alternative services are voluntary, right? You can't afford, whatever it is, Netflix or whatever that month. You cancel it for a month and you do it the next month. Don't have that choice with the BBC licence fee. But anyway, that aside, one of the things that the BBC has sort of done, suggested in response to this mood, is to suggest that the licence fee, instead of being a sort of compulsory levy, could be a tax on broadband services. I wonder whether you get the impression, as we do, that the BBC hasn't really woken up yet to the fact that serious change is needed, not just tweaking around the edges. People have had enough, and it's time for some meaningful change.
Well, I can't argue with that, James. 100% agree with you on that. And they've not woken up. They are a big organisation that's just lurked around for the past 100 years nearly. They've always had it their own way. They've always had that guaranteed income. They always know what they're going to get in every single year. But now they're starting to think, because there are people out there cancelling the TV licenses. So, there's people like myself, and I know there's hundreds of thousands not going to pay it anymore, don't watch it. We can source our information, our news, our programmes on our phones these days. We don't need a TV in our home. And there's so much choice these days. I mean, I'll come back to my childhood growing up. We had 3 channels. When Channel 4 came along in the early 80s, that was brilliant. We got 4 channels. And they stopped at midnight and came back on, I think, about 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning. But now you've got 24/7. You can watch pretty much anything you want. It's a brilliant media marketplace out there. You've got Netflix, which I love. I love watching Netflix, watching series and films on there. You've got catch-up TV. You've got endless supply of entertainment. Yet you're being told you can choose any of these media sources, any of these channels, organisations to get your entertainment. But, oh, by the way, you must pay the BBC 157 quid a year. You've got to have that. And that's not fair. It's like walking to a supermarket and being told by the supermarket manager you've got to buy that product.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so we talked, Lee, about sort of lots of different things, and you mentioned some of the taxes that, that if you were Prime Minister for a day, obviously stamp duty is going to be in your sights. What would you do about the BBC? You mentioned sort of a subscription service you think is the way it's got to go.
Yeah, I think the contract's up in, it's 2027, I think. What I'd say, I'd start now. I'd start like a period where they've got to look at funding themselves. Say, look, you've got 6 years to sort this out. It's not fair. We want to move away from a subscription. To move towards a subscription service. We think it's fair. And you know what? There will be a lot of people who want to subscribe to the BBC. They will happily pay for it, and that's great. I mean, I wouldn't personally, unless they changed very, very quickly. And it may be that sort of subscription model that actually forces the BBC to change to think, hold on a minute, there's a big marketplace out there. We can't just appeal to that one section of society, which and actually, get on the nerves of people like me, people probably like you, and my friends and family. And with the introduction of GB News coming along now, I'm sure that's going to get a lot of traction. There's going to be a lot of people tuning into that. And that's great competition, great media competition, because we've not seen that before, really, on our airwaves. So that's good news. So that gives the BBC something to think about. They have to I think the BBC need a history lesson. They need to look back to 40, 50 years ago when people in this country loved the BBC. They loved the badge. They felt proud, British Broadcasting Corporation. when actually now it comes across as anti-British. He's raking the money in. He's paying, newsreaders and he's paying football presenters, 10 times more than the Prime Minister, and it's our money that's doing that. And we do bang on about money being spent in number 10 and on renovations and stuff like that. But hold on a minute, I think that's a bigger waste of money, spending it on the BBC.
Fair play, fair play. So, so Lee, sort of wrapping up, I'm going to ask you to take your political hat off and let's play.
And get me in trouble.
Yeah. Let's think about an alternative history where Lee Anderson never got fed up with the Labour Party and carried on, and you were, let's say, you were the Labour MP for Ashfield. You're looking at Keir Starmer now, and you've got Boris Johnson as Prime Minister. What would be your one bit of advice that you would give to Keir Starmer, or indeed anybody in politics, organisations like ours or whoever it is, for the one thing that they could do to reassure blue-collar voters that they were on their side?
I'd say go back to being a barrister.
Thanks for joining us for this latest episode of TPA Talks. Remember to like, comment and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.